again to another segment of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. It's a pleasure to welcome you to what we hope will be a very fascinating conversation, and the first in a series of conversations that we're producing on Seekers of Meaning, attempting to deal with what our community is going to be looking like as we emerge out of the pandemic. As you know, these podcasts are designed to explore some of the issues that impact our community as a result of the longevity revolution. And certainly this pandemic has impacted our generation in ways that we could never have imagined. And I want to thank you at the beginning for your support and remind you that if you wanted to contact us, you can email me, rabbi-address at jewishsacredaging.com, or check the website at jewishsacredaging.com, or the Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging on Facebook. All that administrative work out of the way, it is with a great deal of pleasure that I welcome two distinguished colleagues to lead off this series. And I want to thank them at the beginning for giving us their time and sharing their expertise. Rabbi Jan Katzew is the Associate Professor of Education and Jewish Thought at the Hebrew Union College - Jewish Institute of Religion at the Cincinnati campus, my alma mater. And Rabbi Stacey Schlein, who is the Director of Learning at Temple-Tiferet Israel in Beachwood, Ohio. Welcome, Stacey. Welcome, Jan. Thank you very, very much for joining us here today, sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us. We want to talk about, and since you are both experts in the field of Jewish education, the pandemic has changed everything within our community. In the work I do with congregations, I have yet to talk to a synagogue, congregational rabbi, lay leaders that are not extremely concerned about the future of religious education, specifically the young people, as a result of this pandemic. Everything on many congregations has been virtual, some hybrids. So, Stacey, you deal with this in your synagogue on a grassroots, in the trenches. What's been the impact at Tiferet Israel of this pandemic? How have you managed this? What have you had to do?
Well, as you had said, I mean, it's really had a huge, huge impact in terms of how we're thinking and functioning and interacting with our congregants, the entirety of the congregation. And really, one of the things that's been so interesting and exciting for me is sort of how it's been testing the limits and definitions of what it means to be a synagogue. We are an historic congregation, a little more classical reform leaning. And as part of that, we really pride ourselves on our history and how we function. And there are a number of things that have been tested. We had early on decided our learning center, our religious school, was going to be virtual. And so that would mean people wouldn't be coming into the building. And also our Torah study moved online, our services had to move online. And one of the things we were initially thinking was how are we going to have our more senior congregants connect in and participate and be part of all of this? And one of the things that we found is that they became virtual warriors in a sense. They just dove right in, exploring different technologies. One of my technology gurus, one of my congregants here, just celebrated his 80th birthday. So I think it's sort of testing what we expect from people and our congregants. We saw our younger families, some of them feeling so passionately about their connection to the congregation, they just jumped in wholesale to sign up for the virtual learning experiences. And we also had some who said, we love you, we can't do this. Because for us, our connection is physically being at the congregation, there in person and learning. So that in a way really tested our initial assumption, because the parents of our young children now are the ones who have grown up and are digital natives. And yet they are the ones who have pulled back and stepped back, whereas our older congregants, our more senior congregants who did not grow up as digital natives, are the ones who are diving in. So there's this constant push and pull in terms of how people are interacting and connecting.
So, Jen, if Stacey is talking to us about some of the pivots of religious education in working with Tiferet Israel, you teach the next generation of students. Um, when they enter the seminary, obviously there may have been a preconceived notion of what congregational life, let's just stay with that, is going to look like. Now it's all different. In your teaching of this next generation, given what's happening in the pivoting with the pandemic, how have you begun to talk to the students about, look, you may have to really reevaluate everything you're doing, religious education, adult education. How have these conversations begun?
At HUC in March of 2020, when COVID hit, uh, some of us, ironically, were at a certain advantage because we'd been teaching online in different contexts for the last several years. So it was certainly the case that the pace of everything was accelerated. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic, among other things, with respect to education generally and Jewish education in particular, has catalyzed and accelerated changes that already were incipient prior to the advent of the pandemic. So that, for example, in one of the programs, actually, Rabbi Schlein was a participant in this program several years ago for executive master students who are already in educational leadership positions. What we had been doing was a hybrid type of education that brought them into one or more of HUC's campuses in Cincinnati, in New York, in Los Angeles, and also in Jerusalem, by the way. Uh, in between intensive sessions, uh, all of the students in their respective settings were part of a cohort that coalesced over the course of 2 or 2.5 years. So, as a consequence of that experience, I was able, and others who've been part of it, were able to modify and adapt pretty quickly to recognize we already had relationships with the students, they were not unknown to us. So, we needed to build upon those relationships. We also needed, for example, to not just modify, but profoundly change the curricular delivery, not just the system, but the substance, the content. And I would say the Kitzur, in shorthand, I try to look at education online as a type of gamification. It should be playful. Uh, and we should not think that we can just deliver content. We need to find ways, and we've tried to find ways and demonstrate for students that they themselves need to find ways in their own teaching of engaging typically small numbers of people. So that this trialogue, for example, is a great example. In my experience thus far, and I think that this is being borne out in camps, it's being borne out in day schools, in early childhood centers, in adult learning in places like Hadar, Chavrutot, two people, or in this case, three people, can engage in very meaningful, intimate, uh, playful, enjoyable, and uh, educational conversations. And that is one of the most powerful learnings, I would say, from this experience. By contrast, large groups of people with lots of small faces on a screen, in general, are very difficult to navigate and negotiate. That's why the use of polls and games and I would say breakout rooms, etc., all of the features of the platform of Zoom and other platforms similar to it uh, are necessary in order just to keep people's attention. The last thing I'll say is we have tried to pay attention both to the students and through the students to mental health, to recognizing that one of the painful byproducts of the COVID-19 pandemic has been loneliness. And right at the beginning of the Torah, we learn only one of two times in the entire Torah, Lo tov heyot adam levado. Only the two times in which something is not good, we are told that loneliness, being alone, is really not a positive state for a human being. So it's been vital to have one-on-one conversations with students, to treat almost, I would say, every student as though he or she or they was in an individual education plan, to relate to education increasingly like it's special education, and we need to treat each student, each learner, and quite frankly, each teacher, because I have a teaching havruta. In in my case, I have invited a colleague to watch me teach. She happens to be Dr. Jennifer Grayson, also has invited me to her uh, online class to watch her teach, and we discuss teaching because we have to learn to teach again in a new format, and recognizing that faculty development is going to be an ongoing process. We ourselves have to be learners as well as teachers.
So I can imagine a colleague of ours watching or listening to this and hearing what you're saying, and and especially a colleague in a medium-sized congregation where they may be their own. There's just one rabbi and perhaps a part-time religious educational director, whatever the title may be now, and just saying to themselves, I don't have the time to do what he's saying. I just don't have the time. I'm running the congregation, and there are going to be 3 funerals, and I got this meeting, and it's just overwhelming. And how do we begin as we emerge out of this with all the new stuff that you're both experiencing and reporting? How do we begin to take care of the colleagues in the field who are going to have to do some of this, but who may not have any idea how to do it? And I'll just throw that to either one of you. But
So
somebody.
that's been one of the elements and the components that's been most inspiring to me during the course of the pandemic. I've been so incredibly moved by the way colleagues are working together. Locally, I have one of my colleagues here, and he and I check in on each other and do spiritual guidance, not based on any sort of set pattern, but just anytime we call, we know we're going to pick up the phone and listen and hear what's going on, to be there and to support one another. And in ARJE, the Association of Reform Jewish Educators, there has been so much idea, program sharing, even the structure of the learning experiences that have been happening. So we've had continuing education, and the invitation is crystal clear. Whether you've read the material or the book or not, come be with us. Let's be together. And the Central Conference of American Rabbis has done a beautiful job as well in setting different times for people to meet. Even here's a half-hour prayer session. You have been working so hard. Let's join together and help one another. And I've also been incredibly moved by the offers of some of our retired colleagues who've said, I do not have a congregation right now. I'm available on this Friday. Who needs the night off? And I hope that inclination and that skill and that ability for us to rely on one another so deeply and so powerfully will continue beyond. I don't know. I'll be very curious to see how that happens and functions.
But dealing with the actual having to, all that is true and all that's wonderful, and also, and then a lot of that's going to continue, but I still have to teach and run my religious school, and as Jan is saying, and have one-on-ones with the faculty, et cetera, how, and I'm not trained to do that. Jan, how do we make sure that we can provide for these colleagues who are in this transitional state the ability and the strength and the support to actually do what you're talking about, over and above what the institute or the ARJ and the institutional frameworks are going to be doing and are doing?
Well, I think there's a reason why the Hebrew letter Vav is the most frequent one in the Torah. There are going to have to be lots of ands here. We are going to have, the Vav means and. And the reason I say that is there are going to have to be different kinds of coalitions than have currently been manifest. There are going to have to be local and national partnerships. Congregations that have seen themselves as competitors are going to be forced to see themselves as partners. And I think it's fair to say, just like any transition, the whole book of Bamidbar, the whole book of Numbers, which is classically about this period of being in the wilderness in transition, is going to mean that, as it does in, I guess, the 13th chapter, Shlach Lecha, there are going to be Caleb's and Joshua's who are going to see the real challenges in front of us because they are real. And they're going to say, Venuchal, we can prevail. And sadly, there will probably also be, and maybe in the same proportions, it's maybe 10-2, who will say, I give up. Those obstacles are too great for us. So that we've seen some actually incipient examples of that. There is in the Talmud a principle entitled Kinat Sofrim, which is a certain kind of jealousy. So I already am aware of the fact that in certain places in the United States where there are multiple kehilot, multiple congregations, rabbis have spoken to one another and said, hey, I see that you're a famous rabbi and you're teaching the same subject as I'm teaching. And the congregants here are going to go listen to you. They won't listen to me. This rehearses a Talmudic conversation 15 or 1600 years ago in which, yes, we are going to have to deal with the likelihood, I suspect, that there may very well be a winnowing away so that those people, and it's not just rabbis, by the way, and not just cantors, this will happen, I think, with all kinds of learning environments in which people who are recognized as great at what they do are going to have more people attracted to them because we, I think, are in a process of redefining place. And if it's the case that I can be online, as I am now, in a conversation with Rabbi Schlein and Rabbi Address, and they are not at all proximate to me, but because I know them and have relationships with them and care about them and respect them, I can immediately engage in this type of conversation. This is being replicated all over the world. I have Chavruta partners in Israel, in Germany, in throughout the United States and Canada, and I think excellence is going to, yet again, whether it's in day schools, early childhood centers, senior adult and long-term care facilities, in just like it does in medicine. Why is it the case that the Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic or on and on are franchising now? And they're saying, you don't have to go to Minnesota anymore. You don't have to go to Cleveland anymore. You don't, etc. And I think it's going to be the case that excellence is going to be rewarded. And at the same time, and this will be my final response to this very vital question, is you're quite right. We do need to care for the human beings who are experiencing loss. They're not just experiencing change, they're experiencing a sense of disorientation that all that they've been doing, all that they've learned, all that they've worked for, now it doesn't play in the same way. It doesn't have the same cogency. We are going to have to adapt. And that is the process of transition. Transition moves from a sense of loss We are about to do that on Pesach, right? We are going to make an exodus. And then we have this period in the wilderness, and there's a big change between those people who left Mitzrayim, who left the straits, the constraints, in this case, of COVID-19, and those people that will arrive in a post-COVID-19 world. There will be losses. And I think we need to be very candid about that. And we also need to recognize that we're going to have to care for the human beings who are experiencing loss, who have experienced loss, and will as we are proceeding through this wilderness.
Yeah, I think, as I talk to congregations and teach at congregations, that people aren't really aware yet of the amount of loss in ways that are going to emerge. I think it's just something that's just going to emerge, and people are not going to realize it until it's there or they're in the middle of it. And I do want to validate to some of you. I was talking to a colleague in a smaller congregation, under 200 families. And one of the things he was saying is, my congregants are exploding on adult education, but they're not coming necessarily to me because they can sit in their living room and they can go hear a lecture by this person in, Leo Beck in London, or this person in Los Angeles, or whatever. And they say, well, we love you, but we're going to go to this lecture, and it's forcing everybody to reevaluate. So in the reevaluation, again, a very practical question. There are congregations right now, I'm aware of a couple, who are searching for a religious school director or a director of lifelong learning. And they put in their application to the appropriate places, and they're waiting. And based upon the reality and what your experience is, wait a minute, if you think you're going to hire in the same way that you did 2 years ago or before March of 2020, what advice, if you were able to sit down right now and all these congregations who are in placement for new directors of education or lifelong, what advice would you give these search committee chairpersons? Throw it open to either one of you or both of you. Stacey, go ahead.
So I think in general, the process of searching and finding leadership of congregations, it's very organic. And part of it is it's really about finding the right match and someone who is able to immerse themselves into the institution, understand who they are, where they are, and also to share their individual vision of what they see as possible going forward. And part of it is the kind of dialogue that would happen. And that piece was true beforehand as well. Some of it is going to be a willingness to ask really difficult questions about what the challenges have been, what they think the challenges will be, and an openness to partnering and creating thought partnership and connecting with, as Jan was saying earlier, locally, nationally, within the movement, within all these different things. I keep going back. Rabbi Dr. Nancy Weiner, in her book Maps and Meaning, has this beautiful translation where she talks about Ivrim, us being Ivrim as boundary crossers. And I think people who are interviewing and coming into these positions are going to have to embrace that sense and that notion as they step into these kinds of positions.
Yeah, that's a great image, the boundary crossers, because there are no more boundaries. Even for a congregation, geography is meaningless now. Absolutely meaningless. Jan, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I think yes, and from my perspective, and I have very recently actually been involved in a whole series of conversations with people who are hiring those students who will be ordained in just a couple of months, actually less than a couple of months, the beginning of May. And they asked the same sort of question, and quite frankly, the students were asking questions with respect to what is it that I need to do in terms of presenting myself. I think that, and it's vital for us to convey a sense of hope, that just because it's this way now, we're not always Bamidbar. We're not always in the book of Numbers. We actually move through life, and that there will be an opportunity or a series of opportunities actually to grow from this experience. So from my perspective, with respect to education, I would be interested in somebody who just loves to learn, loves to grow, because education, as I understand it, and as I seek to live it, is a way of saying, okay, I want to grow. How can I grow today? Socially, emotionally, spiritually, ethically, existentially? How can I be a bit better, different person as a consequence of having lived another day? That is something, quite frankly, that I remember from childhood being asked, what did you learn today, Jan? So to me, it would be critical not only to focus on what the exigencies of the moment are, what are the challenges of today, but what are the midot, what are the qualities of this human being that I'm going to hire? Does this person love to learn? And it is going to be vital for us to maintain connections, even for the rabbis that you mentioned, the colleagues who are sort of lamenting the fact that somebody can hear, I don't know, David Wolpe, or that they can go online to hear Micha Goodman in Israel, or that they can listen to Brene Brown, etc. That one of the things that will remain the same, it seems to me, is human beings need relationships. They need to be able to engage in a life that says, I'm part of a we, I'm part of a kehillah, I'm part of a congregation, I'm part of a community that in which people care about me. I mean, I think that Nell Noddings, who wrote many books, one of which is simply called Caring, said, it's not simply called caring, it is called caring. And she said, can you imagine what it would be like if you were part of a community in which you knew that there was somebody who was crazy about you, just absolutely cared deeply about you as a person? And so I think that among the qualities, among the midot that I would be looking for, if I were somebody searching for an educator, I would be looking for somebody who knows what joy is. Because, again, we come from a tradition in which happiness, osher, is different from simcha, which is joy. Osher, for example, think of the first psalm, Ashrei Ha'ish. Osher and happiness can be an individual experience. I can be a happy person, and that can be my whole orientation in life. However, simcha, which only appears about a dozen times in the Torah, can only be experienced in relationship with others. We are about to say to each other, Chag Sameach, or Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and hopefully there are others involved with us in relationship. So I want somebody who is my educator to be able to connect people with a sense of joy. I want somebody who is an educator to be an ish anav, someone who is humble, anav, or who is able to say, I don't know everything. I'm going to hear and I'm going to learn from you, and I'm going to learn with you, and I'm going to learn about you. And the last thing I would say, and I'd come back to this, is a sense of hope. There's a reason why Hatikva is the hymnon, is the national anthem of the state of Israel. There's a reason why we come from tradition that believes in the idea of redemption, that there is going to be something better than is the case now. And I think that kind of orientation would be vital for anyone, not just the educator, anyone I'd be hiring right now.
So thank you both. But it leads me to ask a question that I've heard in conversation with other colleagues and lay people, so I want to throw this out to you as the experts. Is the normative what we're used to, or we're used to, supplemental religious school? The couple of hours after school during the week, the 2 hours on Sunday morning, whatever, is that dead? Is that model gone because of what's happening in the pandemic?
I'll give Rabbi Schlein a break and seek to respond. I'm smiling here because I have the privilege and honor of consulting with different congregations. Uh, I I don't know that I would use the word dead, quite frankly, but I think that the model has
Rabbinic
been. Yes, yeah, indeed. Rabbinic hyperbole, that almost is redundancy. But in any case, I think that the model has been obsolete for quite some time, at least from since the beginning of the 21st century, and arguably in some ways since even the last third of the 20th century, for the following reason. At one point, it was supplementing that's why it was called initially supplementary education. It was supplementing what people lived at home. And that's been a myth honored in the breach for generations. So what is it supplementing? I don't know at this point. And what I would say, however, is that schools, congregational schools and others, freestanding schools, by the way, and those are growing in parts of North America, will have the opportunity to supplement the lives of Jewish families, or families in which there are Jews who are living, who decide, well, I want Judaism to be part of my life, one of my multiple identities, but Tuesdays at 4:00 isn't going to work for me. So one of the things that we are going to have, and we already have started to see, is asynchronous learning. I want to learn when I'm ready to learn. Okay, fine. And we can do that now. So I am part of a chavurah, and a group of adults. And by the way, this next month I'm entering my first month of Medicare, so you know exactly how old I am at this point. And I'm one of the younger members of the group, and everybody in this group is involved in one way or another in asynchronous learning. And it's not just them, it's their children and their grandchildren. So schools are going to already have to adapt to, well, if we're going to be learner-centered, then we are going to have to say, we're ready when you are. And they're going to, in all likelihood, have to supplement the asynchronous learning with, when can we get together? When can we socialize? Because in general, education has at least these two facets. One, learning content and skills, competencies, and socialization. And that socialization piece, whether it's at camp, whether it's at a synagogue, whether it's at a farm, whether it's at someone's house, that is a constitutive part of the learning process, of the growth process, of the social, emotional, and I would say spiritual growth process as well. So I would say that those places that are open to saying, okay, we're going to be there for you. We want you to be connected to us. We are going to offer intensive times when we will bring you together in a group sort of setting. And we are going to be there when you want us. Bar bat mitzvah tutoring is working beautifully in this environment. Special education, in some instances, is working extremely well in this Zoom context as well. So I think it's important to look at assets, look at strengths, and each institution is going to have to build on those strengths. And there will be some, I want to be candid here, there will be some institutions that will implode, that won't, either for whatever reason, won't or can't make this kind of adaptation through a transition. But there is also the opportunity not just to survive. Judaism, from my perspective, has never been about survival. It has been about flourishing. It's been about growth. And that, to me, is what undergirds education.
Stacey, I mean, your reaction, your perspective, you run, education at this synagogue, and you're about to also move into a different phase in your career on a more communal basis. How do you see this future going?
So, well, and I love having this question with Jan, because as part of the EMA program, I mean, we were talking about this in our studies, and to be able to explore that intellectually and then practically speaking as well is just really amazing. Um, there there really is, I think, in some ways we have become enamored with the structure of the Sunday school model, so much so that we've ignored the beauty that exists within it. Yes, it's intended to supplement what's happening at home. Yes, it was based on a Christian model of religious education. And there is a reality that many of the components of it work and many of them do not. And it will require a different type of thinking. This past year, our congregation participated with a curriculum that was put together by the Jewish Education Center, specifically Nechama Moskowitz, and it's called rabbi-educator. And there were 10,000 students across the country who were utilizing this curriculum. And the way that people were using it was extraordinary. It was really intended in a lot of ways to be a resource and a skill building tool, so that the educators, the teachers were able to focus on their implementation as they were utilizing it. And I think it presented a different way for us as educators to work together. It was incredibly helpful. And as part of that, there's a small group of us who are working on evaluating what we have learned from that process. There's a survey that's teaching us different things. And we're asking people, like, what kinds of things have you done differently? What did you notice? What were the elements that were key components of your synagogue learning experience that no longer you realize are quite so important? And so from that, we're starting to have dialogues to explore that. Here at our congregation, we have had Skype Hebrew options for years now. But we've always had it where you've been together on the weekend and then you can study individually on your own time during the week. And I think that element, knowing how many of our students decided not to participate this year because they need that in-person piece, I think there needs to be some time to explore that tension and what it looks like and how we can create it, when we create it, and are there better ways that we can do it?
Before we start running out of time, I really, first of all, I want to thank you. My sense is, from our work in Jewish sacred aging and in working with congregations, that we're going to emerge, to reference what Jan was saying, out of this wilderness. There's so much creativity now being generated, I think, within our community across the board. There's so many people coming up with unbelievably creative ideas of how to reestablish, redefine, and revision community, from worship to education to all kinds of things. So I want to thank both of you for being honest and open and really sharing your ideas. And before we conclude, I just want to give you the blue sky sort of prophetic last word. If you could give just one piece of advice to congregational leaders, colleagues, lay leaders moving forward, who may have that, I'm afraid of what's happening, I don't know quite have the skill set, but I know I have to put my foot into and do my nachshon, what would that piece of advice be, Jan?
I come from the place of believing in many respects that our identity as people and as Jews has, from the very outset, from Abraham, who introduced himself when it was time to bury his wife, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. I am a stranger and I'm a resident. Now, in general, that's impossible. You can't be both. You're either one or the other. I said earlier that I think "and" is arguably the most important word in the entire Torah, and it is in life. I think we have to be both. Uh, I think we have to be afraid a bit and trepidatious because there are real obstacles that we're facing. They're not imagined. And I also think we have to feel as though not just we're hopeful, but we're at home here. In some respects, we have to swim with the current, with the mainstream. And in other respects, I think we have to swim upstream against the current, so to speak. And I think that our identity ultimately is relational, that we are who we're with. That is to say, we choose the people with whom we want to learn, from whom we want to learn, and where we want to go in the course of a life. And I hope it's the case that each one of us looks around at the people who surround us and say, I'm proud of who I am because I'm with these people, and these are the people with whom I want to go through life. The last thing I'll say is, I think in many respects, Rabbi Richie, you're a role model in that when we were working together at the Union for Reform Judaism, say 15 or 20 years ago, I don't know that you imagined, you know what I think I'm going to do in 2021? I'm going to have this entity called Sacred Aging, and I'm going to have a podcast. I don't even know if we knew what a podcast was 20 years ago. But you demonstrate that whether you're in stage 8 of Erickson or stage 9 of Erickson, stages of human beings, it's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to learn. And that's why when you said, would you be interested in being part of a podcast? I said, Richie Address? Absolutely yes. And only then did I ask what it was about.
Well, thank you, Jan. Thank you very much. And I do remember those days very well. It was a very special time in both of our lives. Stacey, that piece of
So
advice that you did.
I think of very similar ideas and concepts, and one of the pieces that's been very grounding for me over the past year has been the quote and the misquote and misattribution to Rabbi Nachman about all the world is a narrow bridge. And the key, people will say, is to not be afraid. But actually, in Likutei Moharan, he writes, the key is to not make yourself afraid. It's not that there isn't a fearful situation or the situation isn't tenuous or difficult, but don't do things to make yourself more afraid. And that is really, I think, fits in beautifully with what Jan was sharing in terms of recognizing and surrounding ourselves, and also seeing if we're so focused on this narrow path that's just right in front of our faces and not looking of who's standing there with us. We're not alone, and that we do have people, we do have resources. And also, one of the biggest thing is permission to pause and to recognize when we are at a point where we're making ourselves afraid, and to reach out to our colleagues and to know that we are not alone and we have that support with one another. And I'm also very inspired by Pirkei Avot, which instructs us to Selecha Rav v'kanelecha chaver, like get yourself a rabbi and acquire yourself a friend. And that relationality and the recognition which really draws back to what Jan was saying earlier about being this passion to be a lifelong learner and to recognize in certain times that you are the rabbi, you are the learner, you are this whole relational piece can really strengthen us as we move forward, and not just for the professionals, for all of us to take that blessing to heart.
So, Rabbi Stacey Schlein, the Director of Learning for Tiferet Israel in Beachwood, Ohio, and Rabbi Jan Katzew, the Associate Professor of Education and Jewish Thought at HUC JIR in Cincinnati. Thank you very, very much. I wish you, first of all, I wish you health, you and your families, much health and joy and peace and continued success. And thank you for the nice words, too. Thank you again for beginning this process and understanding this is really a Lech Lecha moment for our entire community. And the future is before us. So thank you. I appreciate it very much. To all of you, thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV show and podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We appreciate your being with us. Again, if you want to join us, we're on this Roku platform. If you don't know what that is, ask a grandchild. They'll be more than happy to explain everything to you. We welcome your comments to me, rabbi-address@jewishsacredaging.com. I would invite you again to visit our website homepage, jewishsacredaging.com, and the Facebook page. And if you would like to make a tax-free donation so that we can continue the work of these programs, you can go to the homepage and click on conveniently located donate button and just follow the prompts. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of the Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out, as usual, to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, thank you. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. I look forward to greeting you on our next Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy. Shalom.